Have you ever heard the saying that no matter how good you are at something, there's always an Asian kid who's better at it? Well, that's Orhan's entire life. He is known as a jack of all trades, meaning he can learn almost any skill. But no matter how hard he tries, there's always going to be someone better than him. So he needs to find a way to overcome his weakness. One day, Orhan was working at his desk when all of a sudden, the party leader tells him he is being kicked out of the party. Oliver tells Orhan that he has been ignoring the power imbalance in the party for a while now because he and Orhan are childhood friends and he wanted to remain by his side, but at this point, he can't deny that keeping Orhan in the party would just slow the party down. Oliver is really trying to be nice and let Orhan down gently, but the other two are being total jerks about it. Anneli and Derek both call Orhan a sack of dead weight and tell him the team would be much better off without him. And while Oliver would never have said that out loud, there's some truth to their accusations, so he asks Orhan to formally resign from the hero party. Orhan is heartbroken as he thinks back to how he and Oliver formed this party 8 years ago and quickly rose to S rank together. They were even the first to reach the 94th floor of the Great Southern Dungeon, so he can't understand why Oliver is abandoning him now. Oliver clarifies that he understands how important having an enchanter like Orhan who is capable of using support magic has been for the party, but last month, during a joint raid, he observed how a different S-rank party fought with their support mage, and to put it frankly, Orhan's support magic sucks compared to that girl's. And Orhan can't even deny it because he knows it's the truth. His support magic has always been mid, no matter how much he practiced, but he says the only reason his spells are so mediocre is because he was originally meant to be a swordsman, but he had to convert to support magic to balance out the party. However, before he could finish the sentence, Derek cuts him off and reminds him that the only reason Orhan had to switch to being an enchanter is because Oliver is way better at swordsmanship than he is. Orhan can both wield a sword and cast support magic, but all around he's pretty mid when it comes to his skill level, and as much as Oliver hates to do this to him, he says he has already found a replacement enchanter, so Orhan's help is no longer needed. He already knows the other two don't like him, but if Oliver is the one giving him the boot, then there truly is no reason to remain in this party. He gets up and starts walking towards the door, and as he is leaving, Anneli talks about how glad she is that he won't be here to boss them around anymore. She also tells him that he shouldn't feel too bad about himself because his skills are still good enough for him to make it as an A-rank adventurer, but an inferior fighter like him is not cut out to be part of an S-rank party anymore. Hearing that from her really stings, so he decides to go off on his own and tackle the Southern Dungeon to prove that he's not inferior. His sword skills may not be the best, but they are still strong enough for him to handle a group of goblins on his own, and since he can also use support spells, he is able to constantly buff himself with strength magic to make his fights a little easier. Getting the timing right is a bit tricky, but with enough practice, he will be able to cast spells effortlessly in the middle of combat, and no one will ever call him worthless again. After he's done goblin slaying for the day, he heads over to the teleportation crystal to register his card so he can come straight to the 7th floor next time. But while he's there, he sees another party running up to the crystal. He starts walking away because he would rather not get involved with a bunch of randoms, but as he is leaving, he hears the party members panicking because they were just ambushed by a group of orcs, and while desperately trying to escape, one of their party members was left behind. The leader tries to assure himself that leaving her behind was the right choice since they all would have died if they tried to fight. The others ask him if they should go back to save her, but the leader doesn't think that would be a good idea since they aren't strong enough to beat all those orcs. However, Orhan overhears this, and even though it's none of his business, he can't stand the thought of someone else being abandoned by their party, so he turns to the party leader and insults him for leaving a party member to die. One of the party members gets offended and tries to punch Orhan, yelling that he had no choice because he wasn't strong enough to save her. But Orhan flips him on his ass and calls him worthless before demanding to know where the girl was left behind. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the dungeon, the girl in question has been cornered by the orcs, and they are closing in on her fast. She tries putting up a barrier to keep herself safe, but there's still nowhere for her to run, and it's only a matter of time before the orcs smash through. Tears well up in her eyes as the orcs finally break through and her doom is almost guaranteed, but at the last second, a wind spell is cast in front of the orcs, pushing them back and buying time for Orhan to step in front of the girl to protect her. The girl is in shock because she wasn't expecting anyone to come save her, but before she gets a chance to speak to Orhan, the orcs begin their attack, so he runs out to intercept them. Sophia assumes he must be a swordsman, but to her surprise, she sees Orhan cast support magic on himself in the middle of the fight. Orhan then proceeds to slice one of the orcs in half, and to make things a little easier, he enchants his sword with sharpness 5 so he can deal with the rest of them. There are a lot more orcs here than he thought there would be, so he can see why the party was forced to run away, and he might owe them an apology later, but for someone of his skill level, this much is easy to handle. The remaining orcs all charge at him at once, so Orhan begins slicing through them one after the other, and Sophia is astonished because she has never seen anything like it before. Once he's done, Orhan turns to the girl and asks if she's okay, but she's so stunned that all she can do is fall to the ground and start bawling her eyes out. Orhan makes sure she's alright and helps her get out of the dungeon, and after that, he starts walking away, but she calls out to him and says she would like to thank him properly for saving her, so she introduces herself as Sophia Claudel. Orhan recognized the Claudel family name, and he also spots the crest on her cloak, leaving now doubts about her identity. He introduces himself to her as well, and afterwards, Sophia offers to treat Orhan to dinner tonight as thanks for saving her. Orhan initially tries to decline, but Sophia is really insistent, so he eventually caves and agrees to go out with her. A little while later, she leads him over to one of her favorite restaurants, and though it isn't the fanciest place out there, she really likes the food here, so she thinks Orhan will like it as well. Orhan notices that the signboard out front has the same crest as Sophia's cloak, and it's pretty clear that she must be a member of the Night Sky Silver Rabbits, one of the biggest guilds in the kingdom. The clan is extremely powerful, so he's starting to second-guess getting involved with Sophia since things might get complicated. All of a sudden, Sophia spots her sister sitting over at one of the tables, so she goes over to ask her what she's doing here. Selma explains that she had a meeting nearby, so she decided to come here for dinner, but that aside, she asks Sophia what she's doing here with a man, because she's way too young to have a boyfriend. However, after taking a closer look, she realizes that the man is actually Orhan, and they happen to know each other. Sophia is surprised that Orhan knows her sister, but there's no way he could ever forget her. Selma Claudel is the leader of the most powerful S-rank party in the Silver Rabbits, as well as the most powerful enchanter on the whole continent. She's the reason that support mages are so respected when it comes to party formations, and coincidentally, she's the same enchanter that Orhan's party used as a basis for kicking him out. He knew Sophia was also part of the Silver Rabbit clan, but he didn't expect her to be directly related to Selma. But he doesn't recall ever doing anything to offend Selma, so he doesn't understand why she looks so mad at him. Selma gets in his face and asks him if he thinks it's appropriate to be going on a date with her 14-year-old sister this late at night. Orhan understands why Selma would be concerned, so he assures her that she is misunderstanding the situation and that he has no romantic interest in her sister whatsoever. However, the way he said that makes Selma even more angry because she thinks he's saying Sophia isn't attractive enough for him. Sophia begs Selma to stop making a scene in front of the man who saved her life, and upon learning that Orhan saved Sophia's life, Selma is very apologetic for her rudeness and thanks him for his help. They all sit down together, and this is the first time Orhan and Selma have gotten a chance to talk like this. Orhan explains that they met during last month's raid, and since they were both enchanters, they spent a lot of time together, although Orhan was mostly just assisting Selma. Selma tells him he was a huge help, but that much is to be expected from someone in the hero's party. However, Orhan tells her he isn't actually part of the hero's party anymore. Selma is shocked to hear that because she can't imagine why the party would want to get rid of someone as useful as Orhan, but she's not one to miss a good opportunity, so she asks if he would be interested in accepting a job. Orhan tells her he actually wants to adventure alone for a while, so he can't join her clan, but she says she just needs someone to join a teaching expedition that her clan will be hosting tomorrow, and she assures him that he will be paid well for his efforts. All he needs to do is focus on teaching the new recruits. They plan to spend roughly 3 days down on floor 50, and they already have a group of A-rank adventurers leading the expedition, but she'd feel a lot better if Orhan were there to help. After all, after working alongside him on the joint raid, she can see just how capable Orhan truly is as an enchanter. Orhan is honored to hear that Selma respects his enchanter skills, but he was just kicked out of his party for being a weak enchanter compared to Selma, and he doesn't want to limit himself to support magic again, so he politely declines her offer. Selma is surprised since she didn't think Orhan would turn her down, but he says he has his reasons. Selma doesn't intend to push the issue if he really doesn't want to do it, but Sophia begins pleading with him to reconsider because she would feel a lot safer on the expedition if Orhan were there. Orhan still doesn't want to relive his days as nothing but an enchanter, but seeing Sophia plead with him like that makes him reconsider, so he tells her he will think about it before he makes his decision. Selma is pleased to hear that Orhan is at least going to consider her offer, but to be clear, he informs her that he will only accept if he's allowed to fight with his sword because he doesn't want to be limited to just enchantments anymore. Selma can't believe what she just heard because she has never seen an enchanted switch to swordsmanship, and she honestly doubts that Orhan would be any good as a swordsman, but she figures that if things get really bad, he will probably just go back to using enchantments. She tells him that if he decides to join the expedition, then he should come to the Silver Rabbit HQ early tomorrow morning, and they go their separate ways for the night. Before Orhan heads home, he makes one final stop at a weapon shop, and he seems to be pretty close with the owner, which is why he came here to chat. The old man prepares a cup of tea for him and thanks Orhan for his help because business around here has been booming ever since he started recommending this place. However, that's kind of what Orhan wanted to talk to him about. He informs the old man that he was kicked out of the hero's party, so now no one will listen to him even if he does recommend the store, and he wants to apologize for not being able to help anymore. However, the man tells him he has nothing to apologize for. Whether Orhan is part of the hero's party or not, he's still the same person, and he has already done so much to help here, for which the man is very grateful. Orhan may not be a hero anymore, but he's still a hero at heart, so the man tells him he should live for himself from now on and help as many people as he wants to. The next morning, Orhan heads to the Silver Rabbit HQ and meets the president, Vince Breyer, and Vince has heard a lot about Orhan, so he says it's a pleasure to finally meet him. Orhan says he's going to need a few more details on the expedition before he decides whether to take part in it or not, so Vince asks Selma to fill him in on everything he needs to know. She explains that the expedition will be to the 51st floor, but they will only be heading up to the 21st floor on the first day, and then they'll slowly progress all the way down to the 51st floor after that. Before Orhan showed up, Selma met with Vince ahead of time so they could talk about how dumb it was for the hero party to kick Orhan out. They won't be anywhere near as strong as they used to be now that he's gone, because his support magic was hard carrying them through most battles. It's true that the potency of Orhan's support spells is lower than average, but his cast speed is top-notch, at least 4 times faster than Selma's. And on top of that, he was using multiple original spells at once, while also constantly analyzing the battlefield to decide the best move to make. Vince finds it hard to believe that someone so capable would be labeled as useless, but Selma assumes that Orhan was just so good at his job that the hero party didn't notice all his contributions to their success. Back to the present, Selma is done explaining the details of the expedition, and basically, there are going to be 10 different rookie parties with 5 escorts, including Orhan and Selma. For the most part, rookies are supposed to handle things on their own, but if something out of the ordinary happens, the escorts will step in to make sure nobody gets hurt. Orhan gets the gist of it so far, but he asks why they are only bringing 5 escorts. Normally, with such a short expedition schedule, you'd want to minimize risk as much as possible by hiring as many escorts as possible. Selma makes up an excuse and says she wouldn't want to make it too easy for the rookies, but Orhan knows that's not the real reason. They must have some secret objective they are trying to achieve, and there's no way they would tell Orhan about it since he's an outsider, so he decides to just drop the question and go along with it anyway. Vince thanks him for being so understanding, and as part of the deal, Orhan will receive 2 gold pieces in advance and 10 more upon successful completion of the mission. Orhan asks if they are sure about this, since what they are paying him is the equivalent of a year's worth of living expenses for a few days of work, but Selma tells him he's worth every penny to them. The next day, Orhan shows up early at the entrance of the dungeon as agreed, and once he gets there, he sees a bunch of the new adventurers preparing themselves nearby. A few moments later, Selma and Sofia arrive as well, and Sofia seems really happy to see Orhan. A little too happy if you ask Selma, so she reminds Orhan that Sofia is under 18 and he had better not try anything with her. That aside, Selma asks Orhan why he's standing so far away from the rest of the group, so he explains that he didn't want to make the recruits nervous by standing too close since they've never seen him before. He makes a good point, but the recruits are going to need to get to know Orhan sooner or later, so Sofia offers to introduce Orhan to everyone. First up, she takes him to meet the other 3 escorts, and they introduce themselves as Anthem, Bernard, and Kathy. Both Bernard and Anthem are defenders, while Kathy is a healer, but Orhan thinks this whole thing is a bit odd since he may be able to use his sword. But Selma didn't know that when she asked him to join, so that means she was planning to go in without a frontline attacker. The reason for this is that Selma got really desperate. After all, the Silver Rabbits haven't made any progress in the past year, so she wanted to achieve something as soon as possible, even if it is a little risky, but she's not going to admit that. To avoid getting questioned, she changes the subject and offers to introduce Orhan to the rookies next. She addresses all of the recruits and says she knows they must be nervous about going on their first dungeon dive all the way to the 51st floor, but she assures them that nothing is going to go wrong because she has enlisted a group of very powerful adventurers to help in case something goes wrong. She then introduces Orhun as the cornerstone of the operation and tells everyone that he has made it all the way down to the 94th floor before, so they can trust him to have their backs. The rookies are all amazed by Orhun's accomplishments, especially when they find out that he used to be a member of the hero party. But Orhun isn't used to this much attention, so he doesn't know how to react. Now that everyone has gotten familiar with Orhun, Selma tells them to finish their final equipment check before they head down into the dungeon. She then turns to Orhun and says she would like him to escort Group 10 because they are the most promising rookies of the bunch, so she thinks they could learn a lot from having Orhun as an example. He is then introduced to the special Group 10 that Selma talked about, and he finds out that Sophia is a member here, but he doesn't understand why there are only 3 members on this team when all the others have 4. Logan speaks up and confidently says it's because none of the other rookies can keep up with them, so they were grouped together instead. Logan introduces himself as the party's enchanter and says he will one day surpass Selma, and Orhun thinks it's good that he has ambition, but his attitude is a bit of a problem. Next up is Caroline, and she introduces herself as the party's defender, but Orhun is a bit confused because she doesn't seem to be wearing any armor or carrying a shield for that matter. Caroline explains that she doesn't use that stuff, and instead will just jump out of the way when monsters get too close. In her defense, dodge-type defenders are actually a thing. Her tactic would work, but Orhun warns her that being a dodge-type defender requires some Sekiro-level evasion skills, so it's difficult for beginners to pull off. He asks if any of the teachers warned her of the learning curve, and Logan mentions that Caroline was warned many times, but she never listened to the advice, and the two of them start fighting afterwards. Orhun now realizes what Selma meant when she said this group was special. But on the bright side, Sophia is here too. And she's the most normal student he could hope for since she won't be causing him any problems. A little while later, they all head into the dungeon together, and even though they were all causing a ruckus outside, in here, they are behaving really well. They are all glad to have Orhun around. But Caroline wonders why someone from the hero's party is joining their expedition since the Silver Rabbit clan is one of the hero party's rivals. Orhun clarifies that he isn't a member of the hero party anymore, and Caroline is shocked to hear this, so she asks him why. But Orhun doesn't want to admit that he got kicked out, so he tells her to mind her own business. Even so, Caroline continues talking nonstop and mentions how Sophia wouldn't stop bragging about meeting Orhun the other day, and Sophia is a little embarrassed, but she does think that Orhun is amazing, and she's really happy he decided to come after all. A few minutes later, as they are walking through the cave, a group of wolves suddenly appears behind them, and normally, they would have to stop to face them, but Orhun isn't worried because he already left a bunch of traps behind as they entered, so any monsters that try to sneak up on them will instantly be dealt with. This way, they won't have to waste any time on watching their backs, but I'm starting to see why Orhun was labeled as useless because he doesn't tell a single person that he is basically guarding their rear all by himself. As they progress through the dungeon, Orhun gets a chance to observe how the rookie fights, and he's honestly impressed. He initially thought Logan was nothing but a rookie with a big ego, but he actually has decent enchanter skills. If he can maintain his output during longer battles, then he could easily join an A-rank party. However, for someone who's supposed to be the party leader, he's absolutely terrible at giving instructions, though he will probably get better with time. As for Caroline, she has the speed necessary to be a dodge-type defender, but she's a bit too aggressive because the second she sees a monster, she charges right at it. Technically, that's her job as a defender, but it still seems a little too reckless to Orhun. Next is Sophia, and she's not as impressive as the other two, but she's still decently skilled as a caster, and she doesn't have any obvious flaws in her fighting style, so Orhun thinks she has a promising future ahead of her. Thankfully, the rest of the expedition went smoothly, and by the end of day 1, they had successfully made it to the 21st floor of the dungeon. Selma later meets with Orhun and asks him what he thought of Group 10, and he tells her she was right about them having potential, but they don't really work as a team, especially Caroline. But Selma already knows how difficult they can be at times. It's time to head home, so they say goodbye for the day and agree to meet back up tomorrow morning, but the next day, Orhun wakes up to a terrible sight. The hero party has officially gone public about him being kicked out, and that means everyone in the city is aware of it now. He knew this would happen eventually, but he wishes it could have been after he was done with the expedition since all the students looked up to him because they thought he was a member of the hero party, so if they find out that he was banished, their opinion of him will surely be diminished. Either way, he's still going to have to deal with it, so he starts heading to the dungeon entrance for day 2 of the expedition. However, as he is walking down the street, he is suddenly called out to by Luna. She is also a member of the hero party, and she was always really kind to him whenever they talked, but she was away on an outing when Orhun was kicked out. He knows she would have stuck up for him if she were around, so he wonders if things would have gone differently in that case. But there's no use speculating now. Luna asks him to come back to the hero party because they need his strength, and Orhan is surprised to hear that, so he asks her if the others share her opinion, but she says she hasn't told the others yet. She just came to find him because she knows how important Orhan was to their team. She's serious about wanting to bring him back, but Orhan has already made his decision. He doesn't want to return to the hero party, and even if he did, with the news already in the public eye, it wouldn't make sense for him to return now. Luna hasn't read today's paper yet, so she doesn't know what it says about him, but she reminds him that they promised to conquer the Great Labyrinth together. Mentioning that brings up a lot of painful memories for Orhan, so he pulls his hand away and says that he, Luna, and Oliver made that promise a long time ago, yet Oliver was the one who kicked him out, so it's never going to happen now. He had always hoped that the three of them would stay friends forever, but there's no going back to how things were before. As Orhan is walking towards the dungeon entrance, he is worried about what the children will think of him after seeing the article, because it states that he was kicked out of the hero party for being too weak. By the time he arrives at the meeting point, he finds all the students murmuring amongst themselves about the article. They are wondering why Orhan didn't tell them that he was kicked out of the party, but before they could say anything to him, Selma arrives. She apologizes to Orhan because she hyped him up by saying he's a member of the hero party in front of the kids a lot yesterday without knowing he had been kicked out. Orhan tells her there's no need to apologize since it's kind of his fault for being vague about what happened. Either way, whether he was kicked out or not, it is still true that Orhan made it down to the 94th floor, and he did perfectly fine yesterday, so there's no reason for any of them to doubt his capabilities because of one silly article. Caroline and Sophia still have complete faith in Orhan's abilities, but Logan, on the other hand, doesn't seem so sure anymore. He asks Orhan if what the article says is true, and he confirms that it is more or less accurate. He was indeed kicked out of the hero party for being too weak, but weak is a relative term, so Orhan assures them that he is still more than capable of getting them down to the 51st floor safely. But while the others don't seem to have a problem with it, Logan is convinced that Orhan must be a bum. They head into the dungeon, and the plan is to make it to the 35th floor by the end of the day. As their supervisor, Orhan isn't allowed to actively help them until they reach the 31st floor, so until then, he just has to watch and be ready in case they mess up. But with how talented they are able to handle the lower floors without much trouble. Once they finally arrive at the 31st floor, Orhan takes over as the leader and stands as the vanguard, but all of a sudden, he tells everyone to stop because he can sense monsters up ahead, so they all get into battle positions and prepare to fight the goblins. He asks Caroline to go on the attack first, so she runs out immediately, but she got in a bit too over her head, so she might need a little help. Orhan is about to ask Logan to cast some buffs on her, but before he could even say anything, Logan has already begun casting because he doesn't think it's worth it to wait for Orhan's instructions. After all, if he's not a hero, then anyone could do what he does. Orhan can tell what Logan is thinking, but it doesn't bother him, so instead, he turns to Sophia and unfortunately, it looks like she is up against an orc. She's too scared to move since she still has trauma from nearly being killed in the dungeon, but Orhan doesn't intend to step in just yet. Logan thinks Orhan is a failure of a teacher for not saving Sophia when she's in trouble, so he's about to save her himself, but just then, he notices Orhan secretly casts an agility debuff on the orc to buy Sophia more time to compose herself. He then assures her that she is more than strong enough to handle a threat like this because she isn't alone like last time. She has Caroline, Logan, and him here to support her if anything goes wrong. And with the confidence boost she got from Orhan, Sophia is able to cast an advanced fire javelin to obliterate the orc. Orhan is surprised because he had no idea she was capable of using advanced magic, and Caroline thanks Sophia since amazing for pulling off a move like that. Orhan congratulates Sophia on a job well done, but Logan is still in disbelief because the way Orhan handled that was exceptional. Especially the fact that he was able to cast an agility debuff instantly while hiding it, and it makes no sense that the hero party would kick Orhan out when he has these kinds of skills, so he has no idea what to believe. The group eventually makes it to the 35th floor, but there, they are confronted by a giant tarantula. Logan freaks out a little because he knows none of them are strong enough to handle that thing by themselves. He's about to suggest that they should retreat, but all of a sudden, Orhan tells him to cast agility, magic, and durability boosts on the others so they can attack. Logan thinks it's crazy to even consider attacking that thing, but Caroline has already run out onto the front lines to face it. He tries to chase after her, but Orhan tells him to wait, because as a supporter, he would be at a disadvantage if he went out in front. Orhan then calls out to Caroline and instructs her to jump over the spider so she can attack its back, and as she does so, she's able to get some really good hits in. The spider is now focused solely on her, so Orhan asks her to keep aggroing it, but to make sure she avoids touching its venom. Her agility is the only reason she is able to outpace the spider, so Orhan tells Logan to maintain the buff spell while Sophia casts her attack spell. Once Sophia is done casting, she launches several air slashes at the spider, severing 4 of its legs and causing it to crash to the ground. However, the battle isn't over yet. Orhan tells Logan to cast another strength and agility boost on Caroline. At first he doesn't understand why, but a moment later, the spider spits out some thread and starts pulling Caroline into its mouth. This is why Orhan asked Logan to cast the strength boost in advance to allow Caroline to break free on her own, but it turns out that she's still a little too weak even with the buff. So Orhan secretly casts a sharpness boost on her dagger, and the extra bit of cutting power is enough for Caroline to finally escape. After that, Orhan tells Sophia to hit the spider with a rock bullet to finish it off, and with that, the spider has finally been dealt with. Orhan congratulates everyone on a job well done, and after that, they all return to the surface. Tomorrow will be the final day of their expedition where they make the big push to the 51st floor, so Selma tells everyone to make sure they get plenty of rest tonight. As Orhan is leaving for the day, he is suddenly called out by 2 of the other supervisors. But they aren't here to cause any trouble, they just wanted to ask Orhan to grab some dinner with them. They seem like nice people, and he never really got a chance to talk to them during the expedition, so he agrees to join them and they all head to the tavern together. Meanwhile, Sophia, Caroline, and Logan are on a carriage heading home, but Logan has a lot on his mind after everything he saw Orhan do. He recalls Sophia mentioning that Orhan saved her from a group of orcs, so he asked her if she remembers the way Orhan fights. Sophia says she wasn't really paying attention, but she recalls that when he landed, there was a huge gust of wind, and after that, he cast some sort of enchantment on his sword before slicing through the orcs. Logan assumes the spell she is talking about must have been a sharpness enchantment, and those are difficult to pull off because they work on weapons instead of humans. On top of that, he finds it weird that Orhan was using a sword to attack when he is so skilled with magic. Sophia admits that she doesn't know why he does that either, but she does recall hearing something about him converting to an attacker recently. Logan was disappointed when he heard that Orhan had been banished from the hero party, and he also felt angry at him for betraying his expectations, but he was completely wrong. Not only did Orhan function as a perfect supporter, but he also used an agility debuff on an orc, which is way harder than you would think. Debuffs are completely different from regular buffs, and even Selma rarely uses them because they are so difficult to cast, yet Orhan was able to make it look easy. He was also able to perfectly analyze the battlefield and give orders precisely when needed, and was even able to predict the tarantula's final attack ahead of time. He was much better than any enchanter Logan has seen before, so it makes no sense for him to switch to being an attacker. Caroline asks if Orhan is at least strong when he uses a sword, and Sophia confirms this because otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to take out the orcs that attacked her back then. Logan realizes that Orhan must be a genius for him to be so skilled at both magic and swordsmanship, so he knows he has no hope of outdoing him. But that doesn't mean he is going to give up. He swears to himself that he will do his best to learn whatever he can from Orhan and grow strong enough to match him in strength someday. Meanwhile, on Orhan's end, he and the others are currently having dinner together at the tavern, and they love how good the food here is. The others ask him what he used to do for fun in the hero party, but Orhan tells them he never really had much time to have fun since he was in charge of all the party's errands and busy work. That's pretty depressing, and if that's the case, then it makes that article about Orhan being useless even worse because it sounds like he was the literal backbone of the party. They tell him he should just ignore those ungrateful jerks in the hero party, and hearing others stick up for him like that means a lot, so Orhan thanks them for being so supportive. That said, they do still have a few questions they would like to ask him, because from what they know, Orhan used to be an enchanter when he was in the hero party, and according to Selma, he was a damn good one. So they were wondering why he switched to being a frontline attacker. Orhan explains that he switched to using a sword after he left the hero party because that's what he always wanted to do. He says he used to be a swordsman in the hero party, and it had always been his dream to become the best in the world, so he was unbelievably happy when he got the position. His ambition came from watching his grandpa fight with a sword all the time, so he wanted to be able to do amazing stuff like him. If that's the case, then they ask why he chose to become an enchanter in the first place, but it wasn't really something Orhan wanted to do. Back in the early days of the hero party, once they started venturing into the lower floors, the monsters they faced became a lot stronger, so they couldn't continue pressing forward with their current party composition. Around that time was when Selma's influence started spreading, so their party decided that they needed to get an enchanter, and since Orhan is someone who can pretty much learn anything, the role fell to him. That sounds pretty rough, but on the bright side, Orhan's sacrifice is what allowed them to make it all the way to the 94th floor. However, Orhan tells them that it wasn't actually a good thing. Yes, his switch did make them progress faster, but the best thing to do would have been to take it slow and gradually build their strength because they weren't ready for what was on the 94th floor. And he knows for a fact that there is absolutely no chance of the hero party making it past that floor as they are right now, and even attempting it would be stupid. The others can tell that Orhan got a bit tense there, so they change the subject and ask him what kind of swordsman he wants to become. Orhan tells them he aspires to be a jack of all trades, swordsman, someone who can make it through even lower floors all on his own. The others are amazed since they have never heard of a dream like that, but if it's Orhan, they are sure he could pull it off. The next day, we see the hero party heading right into the dungeon, and remember how Orhan said it would be stupid of them to try to get past the 94th floor as they are now. Yeah, it looks like they are about to do something stupid. The next morning, Orhan returns to the dungeon entrance for the final stretch of the expedition, and he is immediately greeted by the kids. Caroline decides to give Sophia a chance to talk to Orhan, so she mentions that it would be really nice if they got a reward after completing the expedition. She then nudges Sophia to remind her about how she wanted to ask Orhan to officially join their guild, but just as she's about to say it, Selma suddenly calls Orhan over, so he is forced to step away for now. As Orhan is walking over to Selma, he hears a bunch of the students talking about how the hero party is attempting to make it to the deepest part of the dungeon today. They are apparently starting on floor 92, and when Orhan hears this, he pauses for a moment because he can't believe they would do something so risky, especially when they just replaced him with a new member a few days ago and haven't had time to practice yet. He starts stressing out about how badly it is going to go, but then he remembers, wait a minute, this isn't my problem anymore. Meanwhile, the hero party have just arrived on the 92nd floor of the southern dungeon with their new recruit, Philly Carpenter. For some reason, they didn't bother testing their teamwork before this, but in their defense, Philly's application was stacked. 2 days ago, Philly was introduced to everyone, and she has apparently gone all the way down to the 100th floor of the western dungeon before, so naturally they assume that it should be easy for her to help them do the same in the southern dungeon. And Ellie and Derek are sure that Philly's support spells will be better than anything Orhan could possibly do, and they quickly start spiraling into how much they hated him. Derek and Anelli were especially annoyed since Orhan would never let them throw extravagant parties even though they've got tons of money in the party's bank account. And hearing them talk like that is already raising red flags for Philly, because those two sound like they would be broke by now if Orhan hadn't been managing their finances. Oliver cuts in and tells everyone to stop talking about Orhan because today is supposed to be about welcoming Philly to the party. Just then, Luna barged in because she had just found out about Orhan joining the Silver Rabbits expedition, so imagine her surprise when she found out that the others had already replaced Orhan without consulting her first. She asked them why Orhan is with the Silver Rabbits now, and both Derek and Anneli can barely believe that Orhan managed to join such a high-profile guild in just a few days. But it doesn't change anything because he's no longer a member of their party. At first, when Luna heard this, she thought Orhan had given up on carrying the party because they were holding him back, but Derek proudly states that they were the ones who kicked him out. Luna is at a loss for words because she hasn't heard of such a dumb decision since the Sissy and Kingsman drama. She reminds them that Orhan was literally the core of their party, and without him, they never would have gotten this far to begin with, but the others refuse to accept that. Derek says that no matter how highly Luna thinks of Orhan, he is always going to be a substandard loser of an enchanter, and besides, he's already gone, so there's no point in complaining about it now. Luna doesn't like it, but she knows there's no way she can convince Orhan to come back now, so she just grits her teeth and accepts that they've lost him. The others take Luna's silence to mean she finally agrees with them, so Oliver decides to go 2 for 2 on dumb decisions and announces that he wants to test out Philly's synergy with the party down on floor 92. And if that goes well, then they will move on to the 94th floor to beat their record. Luna immediately objects to the idea because she enjoys being alive. She tells Oliver that if he wants to test out Philly's capabilities so badly, then it would be better to do so on one of the lower floors like floor 30 for safety. But they all look at her like she just started speaking a foreign language. With how stupid these guys are, I'm surprised they lasted this long to begin with, and for some reason, they don't seem to grasp how dangerous it is to attempt to train a new team member on a floor that they barely beat last time. Derek and Anneli admit that it was a close call last time, but they are sure that Orhan is the only reason they had a tough time back then, So, with someone like Philly who's bound to be 1,000 times better, there should be no problems. Luna is still against this because there's a black dragon on that floor, and she doesn't want to be roasted alive. But Oliver tells her that they are doing this whether she likes it or not, and she isn't allowed to refuse. Not gonna lie, she probably should have quit right then, but she didn't want to give up on the party just yet, so she went along with it, and it's going just as bad as she thought it would. The party is currently up against a giant mammoth, which they would normally have no trouble defeating, but when they try to attack it, Oliver's sword does absolutely no damage. Derek can barely block any of the mammoth's attacks, and Anelli's fire magic might as well be a bunch of sparklers. None of them understands what's going on since they thought their attacks would get stronger now that they have Philly casting the buff spells, but it's the exact opposite. Philly can barely maintain her buffs on the party, and since she's completely preoccupied, she can't analyze the battlefield to give them instructions, so it's up to them to make decisions on their own. And if you've been paying attention to their track record, they are 0-3 for good decisions. Oliver's brain cells finally start functioning again as he realizes that he and the others in the party are actually way weaker than he thought, but he still doesn't understand why. This entire time, Luna has just been standing off to the side, watching the whole thing unfold, and she's about to explain where they went wrong now that reality has hit everyone, but all of a sudden, they all hear a terrifying roar as something approaches them, and it's the black dragon that Luna was worried about. The dragon lands, squishing the mammoth in an instant and knocking everyone off their feet, so Luna yells that they need to run away, but apparently, Derek and Annalie are still brain cells deficient, because even though they just saw the thing one-shot the mammoth they were struggling to damage, they still think they stand a chance of beating it, and Oliver joined in on their delusional optimism. They've defeated the dragon once before, so he assumes they should be able to do so again, but that was only because Orhan was here with them, and it seems they still don't understand that. Derek runs out in front to attempt to block one of the dragon's fireballs, but he did not know what he was signing up for, because immediately that fire hit, he was knocked to the floor like a piece of burnt toast. Luna immediately rushes over to start healing him, and Philly is frozen stiff with fear, regretting every decision that led her to join this party. Anelli attempts to cast a fire javelin at the dragon, and she succeeds, but that might have actually done negative damage, because the dragon was completely unaffected, and she is left dumbfounded. Thanks to her little flame attack, the dragon now has its eyes on her, so it launches a fireball at Anelli, and she tries to hide behind a rock for safety, but she still gets blown back several feet. Oliver is having a panic attack as he watches everything go wrong, so Luna yells at him to snap out of it because they all need to escape before it's too late. He finally snaps back to his senses and agrees that Luna is right, but they've got a bit of a problem on their hands because the dragon is charging up a fire blast, and both Derek and Anelli are still unconscious. Luna asks Oliver to buy her some time while she heals those two, so he calls over to Philly to snap her out of her daze and order her to cast as many buffs on him as possible. Philly does as instructed, so Oliver begins charging up his ultimate move. However, as Oliver's slash clashes with the dragon's fireball, it is completely negated, and he is sent flying back as well. Oliver falls into despair because if even his strongest attack couldn't damage the dragon, then what are they supposed to do? Luna is disappointed to see Oliver in such a weak-willed state, even though he is supposed to be the leader. But since things have come to this, she says their only option is to use the fickle gate they keep for emergencies. The fickle gate is a magic item that can forcefully create a connection between levels of the dungeon, allowing adventurers to travel from one floor to another instantly, but it is risky because you are teleported to another floor's boss room, and the floor number is completely random. Philly thinks it's too dangerous since the second they step through, they will have to fight the boss of another floor. But it's not like they stand any chance of beating the dragon if they stay, so they are going to have to use the gate and pray they get sent to one of the easier floors. Oliver activates the gate, and after picking up Derek and Anelli, they prepare to jump through. But at the last second, the dragon suddenly blocks their path with a wall of fire, and as it is charging towards them, it ends up going through the gate instead. After the dragon is gone, Derek breathes a sigh of relief because they won't have to deal with it anymore, but Luna yells that this is the worst thing that could have happened. Oliver soon realizes that this means the dragon must have been teleported to a random boss area in the dungeon, so it's entirely possible that a bunch of newbies are about to encounter a dragon because of them. Luna tells everyone that they need to get back to the guild and warn them so they can force teleport all the adventurers out as soon as possible. All guild cards come with a feature that allows them to forcibly transport registered members out of the dungeon in cases of emergency, so it's their best bet to make sure no one is hurt. Oliver is a little worried because they are bound to receive a ton of penalties from the guild for this mess, but making sure no one gets hurt is more important to him, so he prepares to head back to the guild right away. However, Luna reminds him that Anneli and Derek are still too weak to walk, so he is going to have to wait for her to finish healing then before they can leave. As Luna heals the two of them, she reminds Oliver that they are going to have to fight the dragon after they request the forced teleport, and when that happens, she needs him to swap Philly out with Orhun. Oliver wasn't expecting to hear that from her, and in truth, Luna hates the idea of making Orhun fix their mess after everything this party has put him through, but they've got no choice. She was interrupted before she could explain this earlier, but the reason everyone seems so weak now is because Orhun isn't here. She tells them that individually, none of them have gotten any weaker, but Oliver doesn't believe her because his divine slash couldn't even scratch the dragon. However, Luna explains that it was because of Oliver's own carelessness. The strength of a support spell depends on the caster, while the duration depends on the magic resistance of the recipient, and Oliver happens to have really high magic resistance, so Philly's spells only last around 1 minute for him before she needs to recast them. This was never a problem for Orhun since he was able to keep track of spell timings well. Oliver argues that Philly should be able to do the same since she has more talent as an enchanter than Orhun did, and Luna agrees that Orhun's innate talent as an enchanter was subpar. But that's exactly why he came up with several original spells to make up for his weaknesses. The others are completely shocked because this is the first time they are hearing of this, and a mage coming up with an original spell is extremely rare. Orhun's base enchantments are indeed weaker than average, but he was able to come up with an original spell that boosted his spell potency by 50 times. Philly finds that hard to believe since even Selma was only ever able to boost her spells by 10 times, but it's the truth. Oliver's divine slash works by gathering energy and releasing it all at once, and in theory, if he had spent more time gathering energy, he would have been able to do some damage to the dragon, but he got so used to Orhun's buffs, making the skill more efficient that he started putting in less effort, and the same goes with Anneli as well. She got so used to Orhun's buffs that she defaulted to only using mid-tier spells instead of advanced ones because they were easier to cast. On top of that, Orhun's spells also work on equipment as well, so all their attacks and defenses had become overwhelmingly reliant on Orhun's magic without them realizing it. All of their brain cells suddenly spring back to life as they finally realize how vital Orhun was to the party. But moments later, Oliver's intelligence takes a sharp nosedive as his ego takes over, and he convinces himself that his defeating the dragon once before had nothing to do with Orhun, even though we can clearly see Orhun carrying the team in the flashback. As for Orhun and the others, today is the last day of the expedition, so they will be starting out on the 36th floor and progressing until they make it to the 50th floor, after which they will all teleport out of the dungeon safely. It seems fairly straightforward, but for some reason, Orhun has a bad feeling about all of this. It's true that they are going to be facing monsters that the new recruits can't handle on their own, but with all the supervisors, including him, actively participating, it should be doable. Yet he is getting a terrible feeling from the dungeon today, and he can't put his finger on it. He continues trying to think of a possible reason, but he then gets distracted by the kids calling out to him out of excitement, and against his better judgment, he decides to brush aside his worries for now. Caroline keeps asking Orhun for tips to improve her fighting skills since she wants to kill as many monsters as possible, but Orhun tells her that there's a limit to how much she can do while she's still a newbie. He reminds her that her job as a defender is to protect the party, so she shouldn't be too focused on charging ahead all the time, but she says it's no fun that way. Logan chimes in and tells Caroline to be grateful for Orhun's advice since even Albert used to say the same thing. But hearing that name catches Orhun's attention since Albert Sensible was the famous ace adventurer of the Silver Rabbit Guild. He died last year while facing the Black Dragon on floor 92, and Caroline seems to know quite a bit about it because Albert apparently died protecting one of his teammates even though that was the defender's job, and she doesn't want to let something like that happen to her team, which is why she is always running out ahead of the others. Orhun can tell by the look in her eyes that there's some deep-seated trauma there, and he's not getting paid to be a therapist, so he just pretends he didn't see that and tries to move on. But just then, Sophia speaks up and asks Orhun if there are any tips he can give her since she wants to know what she should improve on, and Logan also asks for some advice as well. A little while later, they've all made their way into the dungeon, and while they are taking a break, Selma walks up to Orhun to mention that she thinks it's nice how much the kids have warmed up to him recently. He admits that he was a little worried about how they might treat him after that newspaper article came out, but they all accepted him regardless. Selma recalls hearing Orhun and the kids talking about Albert earlier, so she talks about how devastating his loss was for the Silver Rabbits. After that, Orhun and the heroes' party went on to defeat the Black Dragon, but it was unbelievably difficult, so Orhun knew Albert didn't die because he was weak. It was just an unfortunate set of events. Selma goes on to talk about how hard it has been to find someone capable enough to replace the hole in the guild that Albert left behind, and Orhan knows she's trying to use this as an opportunity to recruit him, but he's not interested. He tells her that one party doesn't need two enchanters, and Selma understands that, but since Orhan said he's switching to swordsmanship, she still thinks he would be a valuable asset to the team. After that, the mission officially starts and everyone is briefed on the plan before they head out. Orhan and the others get assigned to Group 10, so they are at the very end of the formation, but that just means they are seen as the most promising members of the group. Sophia is a little nervous since they are practically on their own back here, but Orhan says this is a necessary experience since with how complicated a dungeon's layout can be, they are going to need to learn how to navigate it on their own in case they get split up from the rest of the group. Logan agrees with Orhan, but Caroline still doesn't like the idea of potentially getting lost down here. Orhan says that's why it's important to spend time gathering information for the dungeon dive in advance, especially with maps of the dungeon layout so you don't get caught off guard by any surprises. In that case, Caroline asks Orhan to share some of his information with them since he has gone further into the dungeon than the rest of them combined, and they'd like to learn a bit about the deepest floors of the dungeon. Orhan sees no harm in talking about it, so he tells the kids that the lower floors officially start around floor 76, and the floors from there are usually ice or snow themed. As for the deepest floors, those don't start until you get to floor 91, but he barely has a chance to actually explain anything about the floor because the others keep interrupting him with questions over and over. Meanwhile, back on the surface, Luna arrives at the Adventurers Guild with the rest of the hero party, and she immediately asks to meet with the guild master because she has something important to tell him. One of the receptionists, Eleanor, informs Luna that the guild master is currently in a meeting, so she's going to have to wait a while if she wants to meet with him, but Luna frantically tells her there's no time because they need to force teleport everyone out of the dungeon immediately. Back in the dungeon, the group continues traveling through the dungeon, but they are all starting to get the feeling that something is wrong here. For one, they haven't seen even a single monster in a while, and with a room this big, there should have been a ton of them. Logan asks Orhan if this is what it's usually like on floor 40, but he has never seen anything like this before. It's almost as if the monsters are all scared of something, but he has no idea what it could be. Caroline is starting to get frustrated since she really wants to fight something, and as luck would have it, there happens to be a lone goblin nearby, so she immediately charges at it. Orhan tries to warn her to stop because that goblin is strong enough to one-tap her, but Caroline completely ignores him. So Orhan is forced to save her and debuffs the goblin in order to buy her enough time to take it out. Caroline then cheerfully announces that she has defeated the goblin, but the others tell her that what she just did was extremely reckless. At first, she doesn't care. But then they point out that if Orhan hadn't been here, she could have gotten herself into danger, and then Sophia and Logan would have been forced to go save her, so she would be putting her party's safety at risk. Caroline realizes that she was wrong and apologizes for her mistake, but as long as she is more careful in the future, Orhan isn't going to hold it against her. In fact, since Caroline loves fighting monsters so much even though she's a defender, Orhan offers to teach her a special technique called active defense. Caroline gets all excited and asks him to explain more about it, so Orhan tells her that it's a method of drawing your enemy's attacks to keep them busy while the rest of your party prepares a counterattack. Every living thing has to physically prepare before launching an attack, but if you can interrupt that preparation, then you can effectively stun-lock your enemy for a short time. But to do this, you need to be able to study your opponent's attack patterns and strike just before they unleash their Ada. Caroline thinks that sounds like a really cool way to defeat monsters, but Orhan reminds her that the goal isn't to defeat the monsters. Her goal should be to simply stall them from attacking until her teammates are ready, and Caroline says she understands. Meanwhile, up on the surface, the guild master is meeting with the hero party, but he has no idea what was so important that they had to call him out so suddenly. Luna speaks up and tells him that they need to force teleport everyone out of the dungeon right now, but the guild master is hesitant to comply since teleportation on that scale costs an enormous amount of mana, so they can't do it unless it's a serious emergency. But the situation can't get much more serious than it already is. Luna explains that the Black Dragon managed to travel through her fickle gate and is currently on a random floor in the dungeon. If nothing is done, someone will end up running into it sooner or later, so they need to act quickly. However, according to the rules, the guild master still needs to hold a discussion before activating the forced teleport. Meanwhile, back in the dungeon, Logan asks Orhan to teach him how to use debuff spells, but Orhan doesn't think that would be a good idea considering how difficult it is to master. The effectiveness of a debuff spell is largely dependent on the magic resistance of the target, so for Logan to use it effectively, He would both need to master the nuance of the spell and learn the individual magic resistance for every single monster in the dungeon. On top of that, debuff magic isn't particularly effective against monsters in the deeper floors, so it's not practical to learn as a main skill. However, Orhun does know of a trick that could be useful to him. He points to a pair of wolves that are charging this way, but instead of doing anything to attack those wolves, Orhun just waits, and after a few seconds, they trigger one of the traps he had laid beforehand. The others are amazed since they've never seen anything like it before. So Orhun explains that it's a simple trick that comes in handy to prevent enemies from sneaking up on the party as they progress through the dungeon, and Logan would do well to learn the technique since it's an enchanter's job to maintain the battlefield advantage for his party. Orhun then turns to Sophia and tells her that if she wants to grow stronger, then she should learn to use parallel casting. She is already able to use special grade spells, but those kinds of spells take time to activate, so she learned how to parallel cast. She could begin casting a second one halfway through the first one to reduce downtime. It will take a bit of effort to master, but anyone can learn to cast at least 2 spells at once given enough time, so Orhun tells her to give it a try once the mission is over. He says she can probably get Selma to teach her later, and he's right about that, but she says she would actually prefer it if Orhun taught her instead. He's surprised to hear her say that, and he'd like to turn her down, but he can't say no to a face like that, so he agrees to train her later. Meanwhile, back on the surface, the preparations for the forced teleportation are finally ready, so once the spell is fully charged, the Guildmaster will initiate the teleportation. After that, he says he wants the hero party to go back into the dungeon and defeat the Black Dragon, but they all tense up upon hearing that because they know there's no way they could beat that thing. Anelli tries to make up an excuse about them, needing time to recover from their previous battle, but Luna cuts her off and tells the Guildmaster that they will head back into the dungeon to kill the dragon as soon as possible. However, there is one request. Down in the dungeon, the group eventually makes it to the floor boss room, and since this one is a little too advanced for the recruits, the supervisors are going to handle it on their own. Orhun heads to the front lines with the rest of the supervisors, and as soon as the battle begins, he rushes forward to distract the troll while everyone else prepares an attack. Orhun masterfully controls the movement on the battlefield, and thanks to him, they manage to take the troll out within a few minutes, so everything is going really well. However, on the hero party's end, the situation is really bad. They are on their way back to the dungeon with Luna taking the lead, but the others are confused as to why she asked the Guildmaster to teleport the people on floors 40 to 50 out first. Luna explains that it's because Orhun is likely on one of those floors, and they are going to need his help if they plan on beating the dragon. On Orhun's end, he and the others have finally made it to the boss room of the 50th floor, and they've just taken out the crab monster here, so the mission is officially over. However, just when Orhun thought he could finally relax, the space above everyone begins to crack and the black dragon suddenly appears, leaving everyone terrified. Selma and the other supervisors are all left speechless because they know how dangerous that dragon is, and even Orhun has no idea how to handle this because there's no way they can defeat this thing as they are now. The only real option they have is to try and get past the dragon or make it to the teleportation crystal, but that's a lot easier said than done, especially when everyone else is too terrified to even move. Monsters usually target large crowds of people, so they will likely be the dragon's first victims, and Orhun knows that means he can survive if he runs away on his own, but there's no way he would ever leave those kids behind, so he decides to take his chances and fight the black dragon to the death. He yells at the other supervisor and orders them to do everything in their power to keep the kids alive, so they snap out of the fearful daze and get into a defensive position while Orhun charges at the dragon. Just as Orhun predicted, the dragon aims its fireball straight at the group, and even though they've already got a barrier up, they all know there's no way the barrier can tank a blast of dragon's breath like that. However, at the moment of impact, Orhun managed to cast a split-second buff to strengthen the barrier enough for everyone to survive. It was so quick that hardly anyone besides Selma could tell that Orhun's support magic had been used, but he's got much bigger problems to deal with right now. He is currently trying to find an opening to attack the dragon, so he throws a dagger at the dragon's eye, and while the dragon managed to close its eyes on time to protect itself. That's exactly what Orhun expected to happen. With the dragon's eyes closed, he jumps into the air and aims for its neck with a strike so powerful that it causes a small explosion. The others are amazed that Orhun could unleash such power with a single strike, but even an attack like that still wasn't enough to defeat the dragon. In fact, it looks like the dragon was completely unharmed, which has everyone really worried, but Orhun assures them there's no need to worry because he has a plan. He puts on a special necklace and charges back in to attack the dragon, and as the dragon shoots a fireball at him, Orhun redirects it with a reflective wall spell. Logan is amazed by what he just saw because he has never heard of a spell that redirects attacks back towards the enemies, and that's because this is one of Orhun's original spells. Orhun had hoped that the dragon's fire would be strong enough to wound it, but it's still perfectly fine, so he is going to have to take some drastic measures. He casts a status boost spell on himself, a spell which doubles the stats of all skills of his core attributes. But Selma is still concerned because even if Orhun is strong, merely doubling his stats won't be enough to compete with the dragon's power. However, Orhun never intended to stop at just doubling his power, so he proceeds to cast status boost on himself 4 more times, raising his power to 32 times the original. Selma is left in utter disbelief because normally, if you try to cast the same spell multiple times, it just resets the duration of the spell without stacking its effects, so she has no idea how Orhun managed to pull off such an unbelievable feat, but something tells her this isn't the only trick Orhun has up his sleeve. With the 32 times boost, Orhun can now move so fast that the others can't even keep track of him, but he can't keep this up for long, since casting the equivalent of 30 spells at once takes a huge toll on his body. He wants to end the battle as soon as possible, so he jumps straight at the dragon again, but while he's midair, the dragon begins swinging its tail to knock Orhun out of the sky. However, Orhun is able to create a floating platform under his feet to avoid the tail swipe. The platform Orhun just created wasn't the result of a spell, it was the work of Orhun's special ability, a power that some humans happen to possess. In Orhun's case, his ability is magical convergence, which allows him to gather magic in a single point and materialize it. He is also able to use raw magic to propel himself through the air, so his ability is extremely versatile in combat, but that doesn't mean it's exclusive to Orhun. Oliver also happens to have the same ability, but instead of using it for mobility, he uses it to strengthen his attacks. Orhun casts a series of buffs on his sword as he goes in for another strike, and this time, he actually manages to do a decent amount of damage to the dragon. But the strain from maintaining all his buffs is starting to catch up to him. Selma can see that Orhun is struggling out there, but the other supervisors aren't strong enough to keep up with the dragon, and even if she joined the fight without them, she doesn't think she would be of much help to Orhun. This is the first time Selma has felt genuine terror in a long time, so her body won't stop shaking no matter how hard she tries, but she's still going to do her best to make sure the students are kept safe so Orhun can focus on his battle. Years ago, back when Orhun was still a kid, he would spend all day playing with Luna and Oliver in the village, and they all lived in harmony. But that all changed when the Fire Nation attacked. Orhun and Oliver had been outside the village training one day, and by the time they returned, they found that the entire village had been burnt to the ground by bandits, and everyone they knew had been slaughtered in the streets. The two of them were completely heartbroken and hated themselves for not being able to protect any of the people they cared about, but there was nothing they could do at that point. They spent the rest of the day burying the bodies of all their friends and family who had been killed in the attack, and from that day forward, Orhun and Oliver both swore to each other that they would become strong enough to make sure a tragedy like this never happens again. That is a promise that Orhun has worked his entire life to fulfill, and there's no way he's going to let a single dragon stand in the way of him protecting his friends. The purple mist surrounding the dragon right now is an indication that it's about to unleash its most powerful attack, so Selma wonders what Orhun plans to do here. He figures out that the purple mist probably works the same as magical convergence, meaning the dragon is currently gathering energy for its attack. The dragon uses that energy to form weapons in all different directions, but the last time Orhun fought one of these things, it was using way more weapons than this, so the dragon must still be underestimating him. He intends to take advantage of that, so as the dragon begins firing at Orhun, he dashes from left to right to avoid getting hit and then uses a fireball to distract the dragon while he gets close enough to strike again. But unfortunately, with the extra energy the dragon has accumulated, its scales have become too tough for Orhun to cut through. To make matters worse, Orhun barely has any breathing room since the dragon is constantly bombarding him with mana attacks, so he puts up a rock wall to protect himself. But that didn't work out as well as he had hoped because the dragon was able to bank one of the spears around his wall, leaving Orhun completely vulnerable. Fortunately, Orhun had precast a reflective wall spell in case of situations like this, but he genuinely could have died just now. The others continue to watch with bated breath as they hope for Orhun's victory, but Selma doesn't think it's going to be that easy because while Orhun has managed to keep up with the dragon so far, he still hasn't landed any decisive blows yet. Fighting solo is way tougher than Orhun thought it would be, because as much as he hates his former party for betraying him, he can't deny that they were really useful. Last time they faced a dragon, Derek and Luna blocked all its mana attacks, and Nellie provided perfect cover fire, and Oliver's Divine Flash was strong enough to finish the job, but without them here, Orhun is basically forced to do all their jobs at once, He knows it won't be easy, but failure isn't an option for him, so he's just going to have to find a way to make it work. He begins using the active defense techniques he taught Caroline to keep the dragon off balance and disrupt its attack pattern, while also drawing it away so the dragon doesn't send any attacks towards the students. Once he is a safe distance away from everyone else, Orhun unleashes a wide range of fire blast spells on the dragon all at once. The dragon remains mostly unharmed, but Orhun already knew this wouldn't be enough to take it out for good, which is why he made a few tweaks to his fireball spells a moment ago. He modified and turned them into traps that absorb ambient mana to reactivate at regular intervals with greater intensity, meaning they will keep blasting the dragon over and over until Orhun cancels the spell. The blasts chip away at a lot of the dragon's health, but it refuses to go down and eventually manages to destroy all the magic circles. Fortunately, Orhun still has a few more tricks up his sleeve, and since Oliver was the one who dealt the final blow last time with Divine Slash, Orhun decides to do the same thing with his own version of the move. As the dragon launches a fireball his way, Orhun unleashes his Divine Slash, and to make sure it doesn't get blocked, he casts an impact puff on it the moment it comes into contact with the dragon's fire, allowing the slash to go further with more force until it eventually hits the dragon head-on. This results in a huge explosion. A piece of the dragon soon falls to the floor, leading everyone to believe that Orhun was successful in taking it down. But on the contrary, the dragon is still very much alive. It turns out that it sacrificed its tail in order to block Orhun's slash, which Orhun didn't account for at all, but in hindsight, he should have expected as much from such a powerful boss. The dragon starts firing even more blasts at Orhun, so he starts running around some more to evade, but midway through, the timer on his buffs runs out, so his strength has gone back to normal. Selma sees this and tries to help Orhun by casting her own status buff on him, but Orhun cancels that shit immediately and tells her to stay out of this because her buffs aren't strong enough to make a difference in this situation. He tells her to just focus on protecting the students because he is perfectly fine handling the dragon on his own, and as he says this, he casts another quintuple status boost on himself before hitting the dragon with a buff Thunder Shock spell. The force of the blast knocks the dragon clean out of the sky, and as it crashes into the ground, the others wonder if Orhun finally managed to kill it, but no, the dragon is somehow still alive. Orhun can hardly believe that the dragon isn't dead yet, because he's running out of tricks to pull out here. His sword is already way past its limit and shatters in Orhun's hands, but the dragon is also on its last legs, so one more solid attack should be enough to take it out. Orhun drops his broken sword and decides to bust out his trump card, so he casts his destruction spell and summons his pure black great sword, a weapon which none of the others have ever seen him use. The destruction spell is one which compresses highly amplified magic into the shape of a sword on par with a special rank spell. Orhun then jumps at the dragon for one final face-off, but instead of charging at it head-on, he bounces himself off dozens of reflective walls, scattered all across the battlefield to speed himself up before finally striking the dragon from above and finishing it off once and for all. Back on the surface, Orhun's old party is rushing back to the dungeon when the forced teleportation activates, pulling everyone within the dungeon back to the surface as planned. But to their shock, just as they were about to head inside, they came face to face with the Black Dragon. They were all startled initially, but Luna soon realizes that the dragon is dead and must have been teleported along with some adventurers, and standing next to the dragon's corpse, she spots Orhun leaning on his sword with the last of his strength. She can see that his body is in terrible shape, so she rushes over to heal him, but Orhun stops her and instead asks that she just handle the rest of the cleanup for him because he just wants to go home and take a nap. It is at this moment that Luna realizes that Orhun is the only person who looks hurt on his team, and that must mean he took down the dragon all on his own, which sounds unbelievable. And speaking of unbelievable, Derek flat out refuses to believe it, and no amount of evidence or facts will change his mind. Orhun already knows it would be a waste of breath to try talking to a blockhead like him, so he ignores Derek's provocation and continues walking home, which only makes Derek even more angry. Just then, Luna yells at Derek and tells him to quit making a fool of himself because in plain terms, he's a bum, and he's going to stay a bum until he can accept that he is weaker without Orhun's help. Hearing such a logical statement sends Derek into a rage, so he charges at Luna. But he wasn't joking when she called Derek a bum, because she was able to freeze him in place without so much as lifting a finger. And she could have ended Bro's entire career right here if she wanted, but Oliver yelled for the two of them to stop fighting. However, even though it's plain as day that he was wrong about Orhun being weak, Oliver still refuses to admit to himself that he was the problem. After everyone returned home, The kids were tasked with filling out reports on what happened during the expedition, so Sophia plans to write all about how amazing Orhun is. She is really excited to get started, but a moment later, Selma returns home and she looks absolutely exhausted. She collapses into bed without a word, and Sophia wants to do something nice for her, so she suggests she and Selma should go take a bath together to relax. Selma is completely on board with the idea, so they immediately head to the bathhouse. And while they are soaking, Selma asks Sophia what she thought of Orhun's performance earlier today. Sophia is kind of at a loss because what she saw made her realize that Orhun is so strong that she can't even begin to understand what he did. However, Sophia says it wasn't that hard for her to keep track of what Orhun was doing. Selma is shocked to hear her say that and immediately sits up to ask what Sophia managed to see during Orhun's fight. Sophia explains that while Orhun's power and movements were completely unmatched, everything else he did was pretty much just the basics. He simply used the techniques he had been taught about active defense, magic use, and enchantment, but it's still amazing that he managed to play the part of those roles all by himself. Selma is amazed that Sophia could grasp so much from Orhun's amazing display, and she's feeling quite inferior now since she knows there's no way she can ever match up to Orhun's power. But Sophia says she still respects Selma most of all, and nothing will ever change that, so she tells her not to push herself too hard. Speaking of pushing yourself too hard, the next morning, Orhun is suffering the after effects of overexerting himself against the dragon. He knew this would happen, and he actually considers himself lucky because considering how much magic he used, he got off easy with just a little body pain. He gets up to look out the window, and surprisingly, he spots Selma on her way over here. A few minutes later, the two meet up in a cafe, and Selma apologizes for bothering him like this, but she really wanted to check up on him to make sure he's alright. Orhun tells her there's no reason to be worried because he's perfectly fine, but he does appreciate the fact that she came all this way to see him. Selma gets up and formally thanks Orhun because he is the sole reason that they managed to complete the expedition without a single casualty, and she is eternally grateful for what he has done. She asks Orhun if he would be willing to come to her clan since the leader wants to meet him, and since he's not particularly busy today, Orhun agrees. After arriving at the clan, the leader gets straight to the point and asks Orhun if he wants to join the Silver Rabbit clan. He tells Orhun that he can join as a frontline attacker for Unit 1, their most powerful group of adventurers, and he will be instantly promoted to a lieutenant if he joins. Orhun is shocked to hear that since it's unheard of for someone as young as him to become a lieutenant, but the leader insists that Orhun has more than enough experience and skill to qualify for the position. Orhun is flattered by the offer, and pretty much any other person would have jumped at the opportunity, but he doesn't want to give an answer right away, so he asks them to give him some time to think it over. The clan leader understands and tells Orhun he can take as much time as he needs, but as Orhun is leaving, he is informed that the leader of the Adventurers Guild wants to see him as well, so he decides to head there next. On the way over, Orhun thinks about the offer from the Silver Rabbits, and it truly is a good deal, but he can't help but worry that things might end up the same way as they did with his old team, and that's the last thing he would want to happen. He doesn't even want to think about those jerks after all they've put him through, but unfortunately, when he arrives for the meeting with the guild master, he finds out that his old party members are present as well. Anyway, the meeting begins, and the guild master mentions that all reports say Orhun killed the Black Dragon, so he asks Orhun if this is true, and he confirms it, but a second later, Derek and Anelli scoff and tell Orhun he should be thanking them because he just got lucky enough to land the final hit after they weakened the dragon, and I'm honestly impressed, because this level of delusion is on par with that of the Gojo resurrection stands. Orhun rightfully tells Derek to shut his mouth because he's too stupid to form a valid opinion, and Derek is about to throw a fit, but the guild master tells him to sit his ass down before he gets suspended. Orhun then addresses Oliver and asks him why on earth he thought it was a good idea to take his new enchanter down to the 92nd floor of the dungeon on her first day. He asks if he really thought it would be easy, simply because he had been to the floor before, and Orhun hit the nail right on the head there, but Oliver is too proud to admit it. Orhun begins laying into him for his stupid decision, because he remembers specifically warning Oliver not to go there because he wasn't strong enough to handle it yet. Orhun recalls that, but he thought that if they got an enchanter with magic that's even more effective than Orhun's, then it would be easy to make it through the deeper floors. At this point, Orhun isn't even mad about the whole getting fired thing, but he is mad about the fact that Oliver doesn't seem to grasp how important an enchanter's job really is. Oliver retorts and yells that he completely understands the worth of an enchanter, which is why he got a new one, but from the way he's talking about it, it's clear to Orhun that he doesn't understand a single thing about what enchanters really do. Orhan starts listing off the individual magic resistance and buff durations for each member of the team, and he explains that an enchanter would need to keep track of all the numbers while giving the party orders and following their opponent's movements as well. And he wants to know if Oliver thinks he could pull that off if he tried. Meanwhile, back at the Silver Rabbit clan, Logan, Sophia, and Caroline are all walking through the halls and talking about what Orhan might do in the future. None of them have heard much from Orhan since yesterday, but they think it would be really cool if he were to join the Silver Rabbits since they would be able to spend more time with him. So they decide to go ask him to join. Meanwhile, out in the garden, Selma is sitting by herself thinking about Orhan as well, and she would love it if Orhan joined the clan, but she doubts Orhan would want to be comrades with someone like her. After all, with the power gap between them, there's nothing she could possibly do to support Orhan, and teaming up with her would only slow him down. A few moments later, the kids come running up to Selma and ask her if she knows where Orhan lives. Selma asks them why they want Orhan's address, so they explain that they plan to ask Orhan to join the clan, but Selma doesn't think that's a good idea. She wants Orhan to join as well, but she tells the kids they would only be holding Orhan back if they convinced him to join. However, the kids were already fully aware of this, and they know it's a selfish choice to intentionally hold Orhan back, but there's so much they could learn from him, and they want to grow up to be strong enough to genuinely stand by Orhan's side as equals. Hearing this makes Selma realize that there's a lot she could learn from Orhan as well, and even if she's not a good match for him right now, she can always work on growing stronger to close the gap between the two of them. For this reason, she agrees to let the kids try to convince Orhan, but she's not going to dox him for no reason, so instead of telling them his address, she informs them that Orhan recently had a meeting at the guild, so if they hurry, they might be able to find him before he leaves. Meanwhile, Orhan had just left the guild, and since he has given his statement, his former party is going to be hit with a penalty for the trouble they caused. He prepares to head home for the day, but all of a sudden, he spots the kids running his way, and for some reason, he gets the feeling talking to them will be troublesome, so he ducks into an alleyway and starts running. Unfortunately, his injuries from yesterday make it tough for him to outrun them, so instead, Orhan creates a few mana platforms and hops onto one of the roofs to get away from them. He watches the kids run by from above and he breathes a sigh of relief as they pass, but he still needs to lay low, so he ends up running into his Gram's store. The old man is confused by the fact that Orhan is trying to hide from a bunch of kids, so he asks what's going on, and Orhan explains that he's worried they are going to ask him to join the Silver Rabbit because he already decided to reject the offer, and he doesn't want to hurt their feelings by telling them no. The old man can tell that Orhan must care about those kids a lot to want to spare them the disappointment, but they seem to look up to him quite a bit. So the man tells him that he doesn't necessarily need to go through life alone because of what happened, and hearing that gives Orhan a lot to think about. Later that night, Orhan heads to a hilltop to think things through, but to his surprise, Sophia shows up soon after him. She is surprised to see him here since she just happened to be passing through, but since he's here, she uses the opportunity to thank Orhan properly for saving them. She then asks Orhan to join the Silver Rabbits, but before giving her an answer, Orhan asks what Sophia thinks of the Silver Rabbits. She says the Silver Rabbits have taught her so much and given her so many happy memories, but most of all, she says it's the place she belongs, and that statement strikes a chord with Orhan. So he has finally made his decision. The next morning, Orhan meets with the clan leader and informs him that he would like to accept his offer and join the Silver Rabbits. The leader is happy to hear it, so Selma brings in a uniform for Orhan to make it official. Once the others learn that Orhan is officially a member, they all run over to give him a warm welcome, to which Orhan says he looks forward to working with them. This was the end of episode 7. Subscribe to not miss the next part.